Have you ever noticed how even in a crowded room you can feel utterly invisible? Like everyone is moving, talking, living, and somehow you're suspended in a silence that isn't really there. That, my friend, is the subtle, often unspoken whisper of the fear of being alone. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or alarms. It creeps in through the quiet moments, the pause between conversations, the fading laughter at the end of the day, the soft glow of your phone when no one has messaged. And yet, it is one of the most universal experiences of the human mind, something that touches almost every heart at some point in life. The fear of being alone is not just about physical solitude. It is a psychological current running deep beneath our conscious thought. Psychologists call it autotophobia or monophobia, the fear of being isolated, disconnected, or simply by oneself. But this fear is more than a label. It is a reflection of how our brains are wired for connection. Human beings are inherently social creatures. Evolution crafted us to thrive in groups, to find safety, meaning, and identity through connection. Being alone, therefore, triggers an ancient alarm system inside us, a biological reminder that separation once meant danger. And even though the world has changed, that old neural wiring hasn't. It whispers softly but persistently, "You are vulnerable, you are exposed, you are not enough." And yet, here is the paradox. Some of the most profound growth, creativity, and insight in human history comes from solitude. Think of the artists, the thinkers, the explorers, the poets. They all had moments when they were alone, confronting themselves in the quiet. Albert Einstein famously said, "I live in that solitude which is painful in youth, but delicious in the years of maturity." There is a delicate tension here. The very thing we fear, the quiet, the emptiness, the absence of distraction, can also be the portal to our deepest understanding of self. But why does it feel so unbearable at times? Why does being alone make us fidget, scroll endlessly on our phones, or fill silence with meaningless noise? The answer is not as simple as loneliness or social anxiety. Research from the University of Chicago and UCLA suggests that when people are alone with their thoughts, they often encounter themselves more honestly than they might in any social setting. Our minds start asking questions we usually ignore. Who am I really? What do I want? Am I truly happy? And for many, the answers are uncomfortable. Being alone doesn't just reveal absence, it reveals truth. And truth can be terrifying. Now imagine a single person sitting in a quiet room. No music, no phone, no company, just them and their thoughts. Within minutes, studies show that most people will attempt to distract themselves, even with mildly uncomfortable activities. Some might reach for their phones, others might leave the room entirely. Why? Because facing the raw self, the thoughts we suppress, the fears we hide, the regrets we postpone, is often harder than facing the world. The fear of being alone is in essence a fear of facing our own mind without escape. But here's the curious part. While we flee from solitude, the mind also craves it. There is a biological reward in reflection, a subtle dopamine release when we solve a problem internally, when we achieve clarity or understand an emotion. Writers, philosophers, and meditators have all discovered this secret. Being alone is not inherently painful. It becomes painful only when we resist it, only when we approach it with fear, only when we mistake silence for emptiness instead of potential. Consider the way children play alone. When a child builds a castle in the sand or draws in a notebook, they are learning to sit with themselves. Their minds wander, explore, and create without judgment. Yet, as we grow older, societal norms teach us that being alone is a failure, a sign of weakness, or a mark of loneliness. We equate solitude with social inadequacy, forgetting that some of the most revolutionary ideas in human history emerged precisely in moments of solitude. Leonardo da Vinci, Virginia Woolf, Nikola Tesla, all found clarity, inspiration, and purpose when they were removed from the constant hum of human interaction. There is also an emotional dimension to this fear that is deeply human. We fear abandonment, we fear rejection, we fear that our worth is contingent upon the presence of others. This fear shapes relationships, behaviors, and even our careers. People stay in jobs they dislike, in friendships that drain them, in relationships that limit them, all to avoid that uncomfortable confrontation with themselves. Yet in a quiet room alone with thoughts, there is a subtle invitation to meet yourself fully without pretense, without distraction. And this is where the psychology becomes truly fascinating. Neuroscientists have discovered that when people are alone, the default mode network, a set of interconnected brain regions, activates. This network is responsible for self-reflection, daydreaming, imagining, and even planning for the future. It is in these moments that we confront patterns, evaluate choices, and generate new insights. In other words, being alone is the brain's laboratory for personal growth. The very moments that scare us are the moments that can teach us the most about who we are and what we truly value. Now let's explore a curious human phenomenon. Many people mistake loneliness for being alone. Loneliness is a social emotion, a sense of disconnection from others. Solitude is a physical state, being without company. One can be alone and deeply fulfilled, or surrounded by people and profoundly lonely. The fear of being alone often confuses these two experiences. We think that if we are alone, we are missing something essential, but often what we are truly missing is a sense of connection with ourselves. So how can we navigate this fear? One practice is intentional solitude. This is not avoidance, nor is it punishment. Intentional solitude is a deliberate choice to spend time with oneself to explore thoughts, emotions, and ideas without distraction. Start small. 5 minutes of quiet reflection, an evening walk without a phone, journaling your thoughts without expectation. Over time, the mind begins to see solitude not as a threat but as a resource. Curiosity replaces fear. Reflection replaces anxiety. Another tool is mindfulness, the act of observing the present moment without judgment. Mindfulness teaches the mind that being alone is not dangerous. Thoughts, even uncomfortable ones, can be witnessed without being feared. By learning to observe rather than react, the very anxiety that fuels the fear of being alone begins to dissolve. And here's a paradox that most people never realize. The fear of being alone is in many ways a fear of death. We flee from the inner world because it is vast, unpredictable, and honest. It exposes insecurities, confronts dreams we have ignored, and asks uncomfortable questions. But depth is where authenticity resides. Courageously sitting with oneself, exploring without avoidance, is the gateway to creativity, wisdom, and resilience. The fear of being alone also shapes relationships. Many of us enter into connections not out of genuine desire, but to escape solitude. We fill our lives with people, distractions, noise, anything to avoid confronting the quiet. And yet the most meaningful relationships often begin with self-knowledge. The person who has faced themselves, who has sat in silence and felt fear without fleeing, carries a depth that naturally attracts authentic connection. Think of it this way. Imagine a lake. On the surface, the water may be turbulent, reflecting every disturbance, every ripple from the outside world. But only by diving beneath into the still, quiet depths can you see the clarity, the treasures, and the patterns that lie below. Solitude is that dive. Fear is the surface turbulence. Only by descending do we discover the unseen, the untouched, the real. And this brings us to a profound truth. Being alone is not a state to fear. It is a skill to cultivate. The mind that cannot tolerate its own company is like a body that cannot breathe. The fear of being alone is natural, but it is not permanent. It is a shadow cast by avoidance. Shine the light of attention, curiosity, and self-compassion, and the shadow retreats. In fact, studies on emotional resilience suggest that people who can tolerate solitude are more self-aware, creative, and emotionally stable. They are better problem solvers, better communicators, and paradoxically better connected to others. Because in learning to be alone, we learn to be fully present, fully alive, and fully ourselves. So next time you feel that gnawing unease when you're alone, consider this. The fear is real, yes, but it is also a teacher. It is calling you to slow down, to breathe, to meet yourself without disguise. It is asking you to listen to the quiet, to observe the mind, to confront your truths. And when you do, when you sit with the fear without fleeing, you step into a realm of clarity, creativity, and profound self-understanding that the noise of the world can never give you. The fear of being alone is not your enemy. It is the compass pointing you toward authenticity. It is the key to a life not defined by distraction, but by depth. And it is here, in this delicate human tension between fear and presence, that we find not just the self, but the possibility of wisdom, resilience, and even joy. Because at the end of the day, to face solitude is to face the most human part of ourselves, and to discover, sometimes with wonder, that we are not only capable of standing alone, but of standing fully alive. And yet there is something even more profound about the fear of being alone. It forces us to confront impermanence. Time moves differently when we are alone. Moments stretch and expand, revealing the quiet patterns of our lives that the chaos of social distraction often conceals. In solitude, we begin to see the fleeting nature of experiences, relationships, and even emotions. We realize that every connection, every conversation, every laugh eventually ends. And paradoxically, this awareness can feel frightening and liberating at the same time. It reminds us that no one and nothing can anchor us except ourselves. Think about it. The fear of being alone is often tied to the fear of losing support, of losing validation, of losing love. But when we lean into solitude, we discover a subtle transformative truth. The only support that lasts forever is the one we cultivate within. Self-reliance does not mean isolation. It means understanding that your value, your sense of safety, and your joy do not have to be borrowed from the presence of others. It can be grown internally, quietly, patiently, like a garden in winter. And in that internal garden, you find resilience, creativity, and an unshakable sense of presence that no external force can take away. Interestingly, research in positive psychology shows that intentional solitude can actually improve empathy. When we spend time alone observing our own thoughts, emotions, and patterns, we begin to better understand the minds of others. By learning to sit with our own discomfort, we cultivate patience, tolerance, and emotional intelligence. The fear of being alone, once transformed into conscious solitude, becomes a bridge not to isolation, but to deeper human connection. Yet, the transition from fear to understanding is rarely linear. Most of us experience waves of anxiety when alone. We might distract ourselves with endless scrolling, binge-watching, or busy work. We tell ourselves that being alone is lonely, dangerous, or meaningless. But the truth is, fear is not a permanent state. It is a signal, a signpost pointing to the opportunity for growth. And the more we practice being present with ourselves without escape or avoidance, the more the fear loses its power. It becomes a teacher, a guide, and ultimately a doorway to self-mastery. Philosophers have long explored this tension between fear and solitude. Seneca, a Roman Stoic, wrote extensively about the importance of being comfortable alone. He observed that people waste their lives trying to escape solitude, filling their time with noise, distractions, and superficial company. Yet, when we learn to embrace quiet, when we learn to be at peace with our own minds, we gain freedom. Freedom from dependence, freedom from the constant chase for external approval, and freedom to explore our inner landscape with honesty and curiosity. Even neuroscience supports this idea. Studies reveal that prolonged exposure to solitude activates areas of the brain responsible for self-reflection, problem-solving, and creativity. Those who develop comfort with being alone often report higher life satisfaction, improved decision-making, and a greater capacity for resilience during adversity. The brain, it seems, rewards those who can meet themselves without fear, those who can dive into the quiet waters of their own consciousness and swim with awareness rather than avoidance. But embracing solitude is not easy. It requires courage because fear thrives in silence. It whispers questions we would rather avoid. Am I enough? Will I ever matter? What if I fail? And yet, in answering these questions slowly, patiently, we discover that the power to hold ourselves, to comfort ourselves, to create meaning, resides not outside but within. And this realization is transformative. It reshapes how we interact with the world, how we approach relationships, and how we face challenges. Suddenly, being alone is no longer something to flee. It becomes a sanctuary. There is also a delicate emotional insight here. The fear of being alone often masks a fear of death, not in a literal sense, but in the sense of impermanence, of ending, of disconnection. When we sit quietly, we are reminded that life is finite. This reminder can trigger anxiety, but it also invites presence. We begin to savor moments that might otherwise pass unnoticed. We cultivate gratitude for the small, ordinary experiences that truly shape a life. In solitude, the mind becomes a microscope, revealing the hidden textures of existence, the nuances of thought, and the patterns of emotion that so often go unobserved. And consider the role of creativity in solitude. Many of the world's greatest works, novels, paintings, scientific theories, were born in quiet rooms, in moments when their creators were alone with their thoughts. The fear of being alone is often a sign that we have not yet tapped into this potential. It signals that our inner life is waiting to be explored, that creativity is knocking gently on the door, and we must learn to answer without fear. Solitude, in this sense, is the canvas upon which the mind paints its most authentic work. It's also worth acknowledging that the fear of being alone interacts deeply with modern technology. Social media, endless notifications, and constant connectivity offer a tempting escape from ourselves. We scroll, click, and swipe, often without awareness, because silence is uncomfortable. But this is an illusion of connection. Real understanding, real emotional depth, and genuine insight emerge only when we allow ourselves to face solitude without distraction. The challenge, then, is to learn to be present with ourselves even when every tool is available to distract us. It is an exercise in discipline, mindfulness, and courage. And here is the profound human truth. The fear of being alone is a mirror. It reflects back everything we have not faced, everything we have postponed, and everything we have left unexplored. By meeting this fear, by engaging with it rather than fleeing, we step into a deeper understanding of who we are, of what we value, and of what truly matters. Solitude becomes not a void, but a teacher. It becomes a companion. It becomes a way of seeing the world more clearly, more honestly, more deeply. So, what can we do practically in our daily lives to transform this fear into a tool for growth? First, start small. Dedicate even 5 or 10 minutes each day to being alone without distraction. Sit quietly, breathe, and observe your thoughts. Second, journal. Writing your thoughts down externalizes them, allowing you to process emotions without being overwhelmed. Third, practice mindfulness meditation or guided reflection. Learn to watch your thoughts without judgment, without urgency, without fear. Fourth, embrace creative expression. Draw, write, paint, or compose music in solitude. These activities channel the energy of fear into creation. And fifth, remind yourself that solitude is not absence. It is presence. Presence with self, presence with awareness, presence with life as it is. Finally, the fear of being alone, as painful as it may feel, is also a profound invitation. It asks you to slow down, to confront yourself, to explore the vast interior world that is uniquely yours. It reminds you that every relationship, every achievement, every joy is deeply intertwined with your ability to stand alone, to face silence, to hold your own attention without seeking escape. And when you accept this invitation, the mind which once trembled at the thought of solitude begins to flourish in it. Because in the end, being alone is not a failure. It is not emptiness. It is not punishment. It is a pathway to clarity, wisdom, creativity, and authentic connection. It is the space in which the self is fully revealed, fully heard, fully alive. And when you can finally face it without fear, when you can sit in the unwavering quiet and not flinch, you unlock something profound and truly life-altering. The slow, burning, dawning realization that your life, in all its unique complexity, your thoughts, in their chaotic and beautiful flow, your dreams, in their audacious hope, and your very essence, your core self, are not merely adequate. They are sufficient, they are complete, and they are inherently, unshakably valuable. Entirely without the need for the constant presence, approval, or validation of another. This is not a revelation that shouts, but one that settles, a quiet knowing that seeps into your bones and recalibrates your entire existence. And perhaps it is in this gentle yet radical understanding that we at last stumble upon the ultimate freedom. This is not the freedom from something, but the freedom to, the courage to be fully with ourselves in all our imperfect glory, without the desperate need for an audience. It is the curiosity to willingly explore our own vast and mysterious inner depths, to navigate the shadowed corners and the sunlit clearings of our own psyche with the wonder of an adventurer. It is the quiet, humming joy of discovering day by day that we are never truly alone in the most important sense, because we are in the constant, nurturing company of our own conscious self. Because the most significant, enduring, and intimate companion we will ever have, from our first breath to our last, is the one we find within, ourselves. And with that foundational realization comes an even more extraordinary possibility, a beautiful alchemy of the human spirit. The very fear that once constrained us, that once whispered tales of inadequacy and isolation, is transformed, becoming the very catalyst for our most significant growth. The quiet moments that once terrified us with their stark emptiness are miraculously repurposed. They become the fertile ground, the sacred space where we invent, where we reflect, where we create, and where we finally hear the subtle music of our own soul. The silence is no longer a void to be filled, but a canvas to be painted. And in this act of embracing solitude fully, not as a sentence or a punishment to be endured, but as a deliberate and precious gift to be unwrapped, we step decisively into a life that is undeniably richer in meaning, deeper in understanding, and more profoundly, authentically human than we ever could have imagined from our previous fear-bound perspective. Because solitude, in all its quiet majesty, is not a curse to be lamented. It is not a barren wasteland we are forced to survive. It is, instead, something to actively cherish, to cultivate, and to return to as a sacred source of strength. It is the inner wellspring from which we draw our most original ideas, our deepest compassion, and our truest sense of peace. And when we truly learn to cherish it, the fear of being alone inevitably fades. Not completely, of course, for fear is an intrinsic thread in the fabric of being human, but it fades enough. It loses its power and its paralyzing grip to reveal a life that is, in the most beautiful paradox, more connected to others through the authenticity born of self-knowledge, more meaningful because it is built on the bedrock of self-reliance, and more vibrantly, intensely alive than we ever believed possible when we were still running from the one person we were always meant to meet, ourselves.